Michael, so good to finally meet you. You're a designer, an entrepreneur, a professor. You've won the AIGA medal, a very impressive bio for sure. I'd like to kick off by asking you specifically about your business. Can you give us an idea of what it was like founding Donovan Green decades ago, how it's evolved, how that business has evolved, and were you always focused on strategic healthcare marketing, which I think is your pitch these days?
Well, Dan, it's good to see you. Thanks. This is always fun. When we started Donovan and Green, it was an interesting time, and I have to preface the beginning of Donovan Green with when Massimo and Leila Vignelli started Vignelli Associates, I'm the associates. So the three of us started that amazing company. Before that, I worked with them at a company called Unimark, which was the first international marketing, sort of strategic design marketing company in the world. It was really created by Massimo and a few other people who recognized a need by big corporations to really engage with designers and design strategy. So Massimo and Leila came to New York, started Unimark. I was lucky enough to get hired shortly after graduating from Parsons.
Wow.
And then when Massimo and Leila started Vignelli Associates, they invited me to join them. And so I said that I'm the associates.
You're the what was it that got you selected? Were you friends too, or
dumb luck?
Dumb luck. Okay.
Dumb luck. I had a really great relationship with Leila and Massimo. I worked very closely with them at Unimark, and when we started Vignelli Associates, it's just the three of us working out of their house in Riverdale. And a year and a half or so later, after doing just an amazing amount of work, we did the brand identity for Saks, for example, that's still around, and
wow.
For Bloomingdale's, which is still around. And we just did an amazing amount of work, 3 or 4 people out of their house. And then we moved back to the old Unimark office. And we were there, and I loved the work. I loved the people I was working with. But for some reason, I felt that I needed to have my own office. And so I had the best job in the world with some of the best people in the world. And when I came to them and said I wanted to start my own office, they were very supportive, amazingly supportive. And I was teaching.
What's that saying? The nothing grows in the shadows of great trees, right? You had to break out on your own.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a fabulous role models. And the quality of work that we were doing was really great, and it just put me on a path. The other thing that was happening concurrently is while I was working with Massimo and Leila, I was invited to teach at Parsons School of Design, and first I was teaching drawing and then drawing in color, and then finally I was teaching in the environmental design department, and it was a few hours, and then it became a day. And of course, if I was teaching a day, then I would spend Saturday or Sunday in their office to make up for it. But so I had a kind of I guess a platform of teaching, and they helped me get my first clients. So it was really a great relationship. And one of the things that I learned from watching Massimo and Leila, and something that Nancy and I learned very early on, was the kind of work that we wanted to do that was about helping companies create value, really needed to be done, from our experience, with the founders, the CEOs, basically the people that were paid to take risks and say yes or no. And when a lot of our colleagues were doing projects kind of down in the stack, as we say, with a marketing department or something, it was our experience that those kinds of relationships never really had a profound effect on a company. Something got done, and that was important and true, but really changing a company directionally, helping a company rapidly grow, really needed to happen at the C-suite, and that was something that we were determined to do. And so we started focusing not on big corporations, although we had some relationships with people like Digital and some other companies, but we really started looking at companies in, say, the contract furniture industry. Of course, Massimo was doing all the work for Knoll, and so that gave me some credibility. And we were very, very fortunate to, early in our careers, have 2 or 3 relationships with very high quality contract furniture companies. One company called Brickell that had Ward Bennett, who's kind of I think, arguably the father of what was later called high tech, in terms of, he had a bunch of disciples that really followed his example in terms of creating these very minimal environments with industrial products and, restaurant shelving and industrial black carpet and things like that. Our office really replicates that same aesthetic today. It's something that that we took to, and I think in many respects it represented sort of the Unimark and then the Vignelli's, their thing. So having those clients and being able to design for designers, essentially, is what we were doing. Really accelerated, I think, our opportunity to explore and take chances. That community is very quick to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down. If you did something that was what they thought was smart, then it reflected back. And so we started working for these contract furniture companies, and then a bunch of architects came to us because they were their clients, and who did that work. And so then we were doing work for Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, and Davis and Brody and Jim Polchek and a whole bunch of really great architects, and doing their branding and marketing. And then their clients were real estate developers. Said, who did that work? And it was sort of an upward spiral.
Kind of organic.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, how did you, today you're focusing on healthcare, Donovan Green, yeah?
We are now, yeah.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. How did you go from interior design or furniture design, all the way up to today where, and I'm interested, I want to talk to you about outer spaces as well. Yeah. And I'm sure there's overlap here where science meets science fiction.
Yes, yeah, there is. Well, look,
give a little background there.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I think one of the qualities that was resonant in our work always is this idea of crafting a narrative. It's all about storytelling, right? Very common usage now. People talk about building narratives, creating narratives. People talk about innovation. People talk about strategy. Well, those are all things that we were doing in the 70s. In many cases, we were giving strategy away so that we could do the design. We wanted to make sure that the design that we were doing was appropriate, accurate, and really solved the problem that existed. And frequently we would have clients that would come and say they had a packaging problem and actually didn't have a packaging problem. They had a distribution problem, or they had a product quality problem. They had other kinds of problems. Sometimes they would say, why are you asking us all these questions? Just do the packaging. Right. And invariably we would surface the real problem or the real opportunity or the real challenge. And that was very rewarding for us. And so I guess one of the things I should say, Dan, is that I started out studying veterinary medicine. So my first degree is a Bachelor of Science. So I've always been interested in science.
That was at Iowa State, correct?
State University, yeah. Okay. And late in that process, I changed gears, and I ended up graduating in the design department, but I have a Bachelor of Science because I had so much science. And then I did a little work. I stayed at Iowa State and did a little bit of graduate study while I looked for a school, and that's when I found Parsons School of Design. So I come to design with a penchant for storytelling, a bit of a science background, and that served us well because a lot of the work that we did early on was also exhibition design. And we were doing a number of projects for the American Museum of Natural History, for example, that were really science-based, story-based. One huge exhibition was around map making or history of maps, Maps, Their Art and Science, which was a really definitive project for us. It's actually where we met Richard Saul Werman.
Wow.
So many years ago. We asked Richard to write we learned that he was interested in maps as well. And so Nancy and I tracked him down and we co-wrote a story for one of the magazines. I think it was Communication Design or something on maps. But so the through line for us relative to healthcare at this point is just sort of an evolution of opportunity and interest. And what we found was in the healthcare category, this whole notion of customer experience, a strong narrative that describes the efficacy or the MOA of a drug or a process was really, in our opinion, lacking. And we were able to and have been able to fulfill those requirements with a number of companies. And it's rewarding, because you're really doing something that ultimately benefits humanity, saves lives, alleviates suffering. So it's just something that we've been really interested in. And a few years ago, we started to evolve the Donovan Green model, where we chose to have fewer clients and put teams around those clients and basically become their everything. We would develop the marketing strategy, we would execute the strategy, whether packaging, customer relations, shareholder or analyst meetings. We just literally dealt with all the various channels that a company required. And like I said, we put the people around each one of these relationships. So
that's quite a few channels there. I mean, I'm assuming we're talking about pharmaceutical companies here.
Yeah. Pharma and biotech. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I know, because we do pharma conferences, and I know these channels you're talking about, it can get pretty intensive. Yeah.
No, it's and it's not without its restraints, because there are compliance issues. Yep. There are things that you can and can't say. They're highly regulated. But within that environment, within those constraints, I think we've done a pretty good job of helping these companies create value and share their story with their customers, whether they're healthcare providers or patients or.
Yeah. So this kind of segues into one of the things I wanted to ask you. I've been speaking with Julie Annixter a lot about today's designers and the need to, we put forth this theme for this year's Fuse conference to establish a new unity between business design and brand. And we've kind of played off this old Bauhaus tagline, a new unity, art and technology. So this is the 100th anniversary of the Bauhaus School, the launch of the Bauhaus School in 1919. And we thought we'd craft this theme in a kind of reflexive way. And what do you think of this statement, this being the new unity, design, brand, and business? Do you agree with this? Is this really up to designers to do this? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, several things. I think the origin of the Bauhaus came out of a recognition of the value that design could create, whether it's in manufacturing, product design, service design, communication design, whatever. And the people that were doing the original thinking around the Bauhaus were real visionaries, in my opinion. And
for sure,
the disciplines that they taught, the rigor in terms of creating hierarchical constructs, whether it was communication design or product design, sort of stripping away superfluous and getting to essence was an amazing event. They were real visionaries, and that kind of thinking certainly impressed me, and I think it's basically been in resonant from day one. So this notion of being of service to business and creating value for business is something that Nancy and I embraced. And I think one of the interesting kind of shifts in design that I've noticed is for several decades, some areas of design was still really kind of decoration. You know, it was packaging, or I won't fall back on the old cliche about lipstick on a pig. Yeah. But you know, in many ways, I think designers were saddled with the decorative aspects of design, whether it's communication design or packaging design. And I think the designers that were following these sort of Bauhaus tenets were really focused more on business problems and problem solving for business. And to me, it's amazing 100 years later how relevant that thinking is. Yeah. And if you look at, and to your unity kind of metaphor, you think about how much value design can create in terms of customer experience, in terms of product design, in terms of clear communication. It seems so obvious, so evident that, you know, design needs to be part of every decision in a company, large or small, right? It just seems to be so obvious. And of course now, I think
it could be so obvious that it's devalued to an extent, right? It's almost like, well, of course, that things should fall into place. But in my experience has shown me it takes a lot of work to get something to work seamlessly and simplistically.
You're right, Dan, and it also takes real buy-in at the highest levels within an organization on the client side. And you know, one of the things I'm concerned about with this sort of popularization of design thinking as a phrase, and without necessarily understanding it or really having the tools to be a true practitioner, A, and B, when you look at one of the most valuable companies in the world, Apple, which is clearly a design-driven company, and you see CEOs reaching down and saying, "Get me some of that," right?
Yes.
Whatever it is, get me some of that. And the get me some of that without participating in the process basically is doomed to fail, because it's like some kind of bolt-on that has some kind of magical elixir, right? And we know that's not how it works. You know, it works by rolling up your sleeves and truly understanding, you know, problem solving, pattern recognition, you know, all the ingredients that go into problem solving to come up with a favorable result is a set of practices and tools. But if it's being done at the lowest levels within an organization, it's not going to have the effect that they hope to achieve.
So how does you know, I mean, I know personally from my own career, I was a painting major and a music minor, and I kind of stumbled into design as a discipline because I didn't become the rock star I had intended to be upon graduating college. So you know, graphic design gave me a trade, and I'm good visually, and so this, you know, I found my place at a company. I started working myself up, but I was doing, you know, project work, and I still do a lot of project work, like you're saying. It wasn't, I mean, I wasn't having discussions with our CEO for at least 10 years into my career, and it seems like there's a kind of irony to that, because once I got at the table, I realized, oh my gosh, none of these folks think like I do. And I would just kind of, what seemed to be very natural and easy and associative to me, you know, I started to recognize, wow, there's a real need for this at this table here.
Yeah.
how does I mean, for me, I kind of stumbled on that, and I think there's some dumb luck there. I'm a nice guy, and eventually I stuck around long enough. Eventually, I got invited. But let's say you're starting out, and I mean, you're a kid. You're in your 20s. You just graduated. You don't know where you're going, what's happening. I mean, how do you get from there into? How do you skip all that like ladder climbing, I suppose? I mean, or do you want to skip the ladder climbing? I don't know. How do you get from one set to the other? There seems to be a void, and I think what we're trying to do this year, is talking to Julie, is kind of really bridge that gap and articulate that journey.
Mm-hmm,
do you have any thoughts on that?
I have two thoughts. One is designers really have, I think, a unique set of capabilities. Around and I mean you learn a lot of those skills in school, especially the technical schools, for visualization and that kind of thing. I think you do learn some problem solving methodologies that, by the way, what has been taught in design schools traditionally and historically is now being taught in business schools, right? I mean,
really?
Every business school has at least one or two classes on entrepreneurialism, which invariably incorporates design thinking and other kind of problem solving tool sets. I mean, Yale's got a program, Stanford's got a program. I mean, I think it's almost becoming universal.
Yeah.
So that brings up a couple of other things. And one is this linkage between design thinking and entrepreneurialism. And what I've maintained for quite some time is designers have really a unique ability and a unique tool sets to behave as entrepreneurs. We're trained as problem solvers. We're trained to create a narrative. We're trained to be able to visualize, our thinking. We may not be the best business people in the world sometimes relative to financial forecasts or whatever, but those skills are easy to adapt or find, right? And parenthetically, a lot of entrepreneurs have really good financial skills and are tripped up by their inability to tell their story, right?
Right.
So we have a kind of a reverse skill set, which is highly valuable. And one of the things that I've advocated for a very long time is for a young designer starting out, I think that sort of ladder approach to developing experience and new skills is an important process. And I think it's hard to skip. It can be condensed, but so that's one sort of thought. The second thought is, because designers have all these skills that are required for an entrepreneur, I've advocated for young designers to think about spending part of their time behaving like an entrepreneur. Look for a problem to solve. Spend a Saturday and a Sunday working on that problem. Build a network of similar people that share that interest. And who knows? It may be that at some point that entrepreneurial spark and the problem that needs to be solved could become their full focus. If not, it gives them a chance to explore and to think and to craft story, craft customer experience. And, those skills are extremely valuable. One of the things that we've done here, so talk the talk, but I walk the walk as well.
Yeah.
So in our experience here at Donovan Green, we've started 3 companies on basically the principle that I just shared. We saw what we thought was an unsatisfied need with a large audience, and we were able to come up with what we believed was a problem solution, and we were able to convince some like-minded people to go on a journey with us, and in some cases to help fund it. But basically, we were putting our own efforts, our own time and energy, sweat equity as well as, yeah, very proactively. And our latest adventure is Outer Places. It's organizing ideas where science meets science fiction. And it is a digital publishing company that came out of a request from a friend about wanting to build as simple as an online store based on our retail experience, which is pretty extensive. In our time, we invented and designed every moment of American Girl Place, which is, I think, arguably one of the most successful retail destinations in the country.
Absolutely, I have a daughter.
I have two.
Okay.
We also helped Sony develop their retail business and ultimately developed what's called the Metreon in San Francisco and Potsdamer Platz in Germany, in Berlin. We helped Hallmark develop their a different retail strategy, and on and on. So we've had quite a lot of experience in creating customer experience, around retail. So that's where this question came from, and it was around a kind of a quasi-science museum, and that was very interested in the paranormal and really on the science fiction side of the ledger. And so I started to do kind of an investigation. It's typical, how big is the audience?
Right.
What are the kind of products or experiences one could create? And to be to be very specific about this, this was for the International UFO Research Center in Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh wow! Right at the heart of it.
I am an expert on the Roswell event.
Oh really?
Yeah, July 7, 1947. Dan, I am one of the only people you'll ever meet. I probably am the only person you will ever meet that has actually walked the real crash site.
Really?
Yeah.
So
I did a Discovery Channel documentary. I probably shouldn't even say this, but and they erected a monument, like a granite monument, paid for, I think, by the Discovery Channel. Maybe Discovery, maybe History. I don't remember. This is several years ago, because they replayed the whole event, right, the Roswell event. And they were on the wrong place. They were about 15 minutes because they didn't want them on the actual site.
So are you a believer, Roswell? This happened, or do you not make that? This is not a rehearsed question here. I wasn't planning on asking you this, but did were we in fact visited by aliens, or what is your take? Since you're an expert.
Here's the thing. Our universe is 13 billion years old and continuing to expand. Our solar system is 9 billion. That's pretty old, but the universe is significantly bigger and older. And it's hard to believe that when you have a system this vast, that there isn't sort of replication of intelligent life. I mean, I really, that I truly believe. And of course, when we started out,
I would agree with you there. I mean, you can just look at what's happened on the planet Earth itself. How many species have cropped up? I mean, we're talking billions and species of different types of beings are happening all the time, constantly.
And
So
100 million years is a heartbeat, you know,
right, yeah,
in universe time. That's one thing. And the second thing is that, you know, thanks to Kepler and our other deep space probes, when we started outer places, there were a handful of what are called exoplanets. And basically an exoplanet is a planet that is in a solar system circling the sun in a position similar to Earth, right? It's kind of the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, with enough mass, and in some cases, the right elements in terms of, you know, iron and nickel and all these other elements that are necessary. And we find these in meteorites, right? So we know that this stuff is out there floating around. And so we've gone from a handful to literally thousands of exoplanets now. And through spectral analysis, NASA and other scientific entities are able to ascertain the makeup of these exoplanets. I mean, it's when the planet moves in front of the sun and how, you know, they're able to determine what the planet's made of and what the probability is of being able to sustain life. I believe it's NASA has done a sort of a mapping system now where it's 0 to 100, 100 being the best, capable of supporting life or as we know it. And I think Earth is somewhere in the high 80s, and there are exoplanets that have a much higher ranking, you know. So there are ostensibly planets that are nothing but Palm Beach, you know, every day. Right? Who knows? Right. So, you know, take that as just a given. The second is that, you know, in these billions of years, I mean, our mode of transportation, speed of light, et cetera, could be very primitive. I just was reading this morning that, you know, the Hyperloop tubes that 3 or 4 companies are working on, 600 miles per hour kind of movement, right? And that's primitive. And if you read science fiction about elevators, you know, to the moon and things like that, scientifically, most of these things are possible. From an engineering perspective, we're still in our crawling stage, right? We may not even be there. We may be embryonic, but considering how quickly science can move, and especially if there's a requirement and support, I think that when Stephen Hawkins, who's someone I admired enormously, in the last years of his life, was a strong advocate for colonization space. And it was his belief that the Earth was threatened by at least 3 probabilities that could alter, if not exterminate, human life. And one was an outer space event, you know, huge meteor crashing into Earth. And thankfully, there isn't anything on the horizon, but we can always be surprised, I suppose. NASA puts a lot of effort into that. Actually, during that government shutdown, one of the sidebars of that was NASA had to shut off their sort of watching for any kind of calamity. Yeah. Now this, you know, this isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, they can predict hundreds of years out, you know, possibility of some kind of event. The second is obviously man-made, you know, climate change, and the third is some idiot pulls a trigger somewhere, you know, and that has cascading events that creates an uninhabitable environment. So those 3 things are distinct possibilities, and so this notion of starting to build colonies in outer space seems to be an absolute necessity, you know, and to use those as platforms to go deeper into space. Because of outer places, I read a lot of science fiction. I've always been a science fiction fan. And, you know, when I talk to scientists, and by the way, one of the things we did with outer places, we made the decision having started with kind of the whole UFO science fiction side of the platform, as we evolved, we realized that if we were going to make a contribution to this discussion, and if we were going to have any influence at all, and if we could be a resource for our audience, that our interest was really more about science than science fiction. So again, our organizing ideas where science meets science fiction.
Yeah.
And as I've spent time with scientists, what you realize is science fiction and design are totally aligned. And think about it in this context. As a designer, we're given a problem to solve, right? And we go about solving the problem, and if we do it properly, what we do is we not only solve the problem, but we create a narrative. We create a narrative journey that we take our client on, so that when we walk in with the final solution, the client goes, well, that was easy. So obvious, right? I mean, the best design solution is always the one that goes, that's so obvious. I mean, so happy ending. Science fiction is basically precisely the same process, only the science fiction writer, as opposed to designer, he or she takes on that problem to solve themselves, right? And then they take us on a narrative journey, usually with some problem resolution. It's all about creating an experience. It's about form making. It's about environment. You know, it's often about shoot 'em up or whatever. It could be lots of things. But
I have these images. A bunch of things are coming to mind. The last thing you just said reminded me of a Marty Neumeier quote, which was, "You know you've succeeded when everybody in the room says, well, that's what I've been saying all along.'" That's how you know you've designed something the right way.
That's a happy moment, you know?
That's right. But I keep thinking, as you're talking of, you know, however, you know, people today in the moment might think some of these thoughts are kind of cockamamie or what have you. But I just kept thinking of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings of submarines and helicopters, these machines that I'm sure the average Joe on the street in that day and age was probably thinking, what kind of, you know, probably think that's just kooky. But
precisely,
this is you know, with your imagination, there are no restrictions. And sometimes that is really does not exist in the boardroom.
Yeah.
There is no imagination. There's a lot of pressure to succeed and hit your numbers and all of that kind of a thing. So, and then the last thing was Einstein. Apparently, what I've heard this a million times, what differentiated Einstein from all the other physicists was he was a real creative genius.
Yeah,
he could visualize things that the other physicists just couldn't understand. How did you come up with that? And he would say, "Oh, I was in the shower and I pictured a beam of light going off my finger." He would say all this kind of wacky stuff.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Nancy and I, we talk about who gets your shower time.
Is that from the Einstein moments, or just? It's
from personal experience. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've fallen asleep, you know, wrestling with something and a problem to solve, or a narrative to create, or you know, something. And it's that moment of kind of clarity that seems to come, and it's like eureka, you know.
It's really it's like a miraculous. It's a very kind of a strange experience. I mean, I've had it myself. I'll see something like, oh, that's, and then I'll design it. And I know a lot of people just can't do that or don't have that experience.
Well, you know, our tagline, where science meets science fiction, literally came in the shower. You know, when I was thinking about what did I want this site to be, you know, and one of the things that I've being involved in education for a long time, as we've discussed, one of the things I sincerely believe is you learn more when you're smiling, and this notion of of engaging young people in STEM or STEAM based curriculum, I think is critical. It's critical for the environment. It's critical around sustainability. It's critical for them to have a meaningful path in life. And one of our objectives with Outer Places is to expose young people to scientific phenomena. 90% of what we write about now, and we produce several articles a day, we produce generally one video every day or two, is around scientific phenomena. So we're scanning the universe, curating a story about what's happening, and our sources are MIT and NASA and on and on and on. And what we found is we have hundreds of thousands of page views a day, millions aggregated over the year. Our audience is basically 88% come through a mobile device. They're basically 18 to 32, predominantly.
Is this the Outer Spaces website?
Yeah.
Outerspaces.com?
Outer Places.
Oh, I'm sorry. Outerplaces.com.
Outer Places, yeah. Outerplaces.com.
Okay.
Yeah. And something else about Outer Places that is interesting, Dan, relative to our earlier conversation. We want Outer Places to be a successful business, and we believe that probably sponsorship is the right path, the right revenue model, rather than digital advertising or whatever. But what Outer Places has enabled Donovan and Green to do, because it resides within Donovan and Green, although it has its own employees, editors, etc., videographers, it's enabled Donovan and Green to experiment and to learn about various forms of interaction, engagement, channels that perhaps, if it wasn't for Outer Places, we wouldn't have an opportunity to explore and develop expertise, right? So, our struggles with Facebook and Facebook changing their algorithms constantly, which is torture for a digital publisher. And it doesn't matter if you're BuzzFeed or Vice or Vox or whatever. We all struggle with Facebook's decisions, right? Well, I'm not knocking Facebook per se. It's just a problem that we deal with. But the problem that we confront with Outer Places is also a problem that other clients of ours experience if they're in the social media or trying to use social media, as one arrow in their marketing communications quiver, for example. And so having the understanding and the suffering that personally, it enables us then to think about strategies and to be of counsel and to basically help advise our clients based on our own experience.
Okay. So, this goes right back to that original point, telling the story. And it seems to me, I do. So first of all, you really tapped into my interest here, because I love the cosmos and.
Well, you're going to be on Outer Places every day then.
Yeah, now I am, and I'm so sorry I call it Outer Spaces, Outer Places. But the other thing is applying a narrative. If you don't have a narrative, if you don't have a story, then it becomes immediately esoteric. People can't relate. So, when we're talking about traveling the speed of light, who would know what that even could be conceivable if you didn't have like Star Trek and Star Wars, what this means.
Yeah.
So I think science fiction kind of puts a narrative on the science. I know there's very purist physicists out there, and I don't think like those folks do, who kind of poo-poo the sci-fi stuff because it distorts what people think about actual science. But if you can imagine a world without that narrative, that stuff starts to really go away from most of us.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, Dan, I've talked with a lot of scientists who really see science fiction as an envisioning tool.
Right.
I mean, to your point, it's very much like design as a, if you can't, what was that? The great educator. If you can diagram it, you can solve the problem or something. I can't remember, but I think the ability to think and envision beyond sort of the constraints of what's in front of you is really a skill that design honors, and I think that again, not having a designer or a creative thinker on a team that is trying to solve a problem is missing a real important resource.
I think it's fundamental.
Yeah.
I think it's fundamental because otherwise you have a bunch of folks chasing numbers or chasing data, and all that stuff works. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm in a corporation. I see that stuff working every day, but you can also see how logic and reason, we live in a technological age, so they're very important tools, but there comes a point where you can kind of you need to go beyond logic. You need to start to think non-linearly. You need to start thinking associatively and kind of from this human space of what could things be like. Let's walk away from the bottom line, and let's not have a budget for this discussion and talk about crazy ideas. I know I've been in meetings and people look at me like I'm out of my mind when I say this, but especially when I say let's not talk about a budget. I've had, come on, like hippy dippy. This is the kind of reaction I've had. But yeah. I think it's fundamental because otherwise you end up, I think about Kodak, who invented the digital camera, and the digital camera put Kodak out of business, ironically, because it could not really cross that gap. And a lot of people thinks don't see how that could happen, but I can see very much how that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that happens too is, especially in large organizations, you become trapped by your own success in some ways.
Right.
And,
it happens as you get older too, I've noticed.
Yeah. Well, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Right. But, it probably is broken. You just don't know it, because there are events, there are discoveries, there are things in the ethers that are changing. And, I came across a statistic the other day that something like of the 500 corporations that were part of the New York Stock Exchange in the 70s, something like only 30% still exist.
Right.
I mean, that's extraordinary.
That's accelerating.
Yeah, exactly. And so the pace of change, I think, is accelerating. I mean, technology is certainly fuel for that. So again, in that race, I guess, creative thinking and problem solving skills that designers invariably possess are so critical that you would think that. Well, I mean.
Yeah. So, Michael, you last question for you. You kind of are in both worlds. You're a business leader, you're a designer, but you're a professor. You still, I know you were telling me you still visit schools and talk to students. What can design professionals leave behind for the designers for tomorrow? How can we help the future of design?
Well, I think there's more than one answer to that, but one is by leaving a legacy that demonstrates how value is created through design processes, design thinking, design behavior. So proof of pudding, right? And whether whether as an entrepreneur where you've actually built a company and employ people and pursue innovation in that context, is one path. I think the other path that I've really enjoyed is, as you mentioned, I'm vice chairman of the board of Parsons School of Design, which is my alma mater. And after Iowa State University, I went to Parsons, and after Parsons, they invited me to teach, and I taught for a long time. And we've talked about that. And I've been on the board of Parsons for a very long time. I'm an activist board member, so I really enjoy coming in for critiques. Talking about my experience, sharing my experience. We often have student groups come to our office, and just so they can see what a working environment looks like and all that stuff, which is fun. So I guess and both Nancy and I have always been involved in the professional organizations in and around design, whether it's the AIGA or SEGD or Art Directors Club, or on Aspen Design Conference when that existed, on and on. And Nancy and I are both very involved with TED in its early days. Nancy was an advisor to Richard Werman, and
I didn't know that.
We went to every TED for years.
Cool.
All of this is both beneficial to us as designers, but also it was a way to give back to the community that has been good to us. And, I love interacting with, associating with designers. I mean, fellow thinkers. I feel like we share a kind of common bond and a set of values that I respect. We've been to the wars together.
Yeah.
We're veterans in many respects. We've survived somehow. Amazing. And hopefully we will continue to thrive, right? So, but I've always felt that, doing the work is important, but also sharing the doing and sharing it with young people is also important. So I've really been so gratified by my engagement with Parsons. I think we were talking earlier about the Parsons Scholars, and where, it's become abundantly clear to many of us that if you look into or look out at a classroom today, the average tuition at Parsons, and this is true probably pretty much any design school in America, is close to $60,000 a year.
Yeah. I have 3 kids, so I'm looking at these fees, and it's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And also, when you look out at, so you're talking about a segment of the population that A, can somehow figure out how to come up with a dough, A. B, there's very little diversity in schools that I see. And at Parsons, we're really working to rectify that problem. And one of the ways that we're doing is we've created a program called the Parsons Scholars. And the Parsons Scholars basically starts to recruit 10th graders in New York City public schools and put them through a relatively rigorous curriculum where they meet every Saturday for 2 years. They meet during the summer. They have a summer class. And when they graduate from the Parsons program, they have 5 credits. So when they start Parsons as a freshman, they already have a leg up, and they also have a cohort of fellow students that are of color, often from modest backgrounds. These kids end up with scholarships. Their graduation rate is astounding, and the number that go on to graduate school or go into meaningful work is astounding. And so this is one way to basically, hopefully, ensure that in the future we have not just good thinkers, but we have good thinkers that are diverse, that have diverse backgrounds, economically, racially, in every segment. Because I think that one of the dilemmas with some professions is it becomes so kind of monoculture. based
Yeah.
on cost and family pressure or interest or whatever. When when I
Well,
look,
I think legacies occur,
yeah,
right? And they're, you're talking about different ethnic backgrounds, and we don't have to go into the legacies across the globe there, but um, sometimes you have, let's say the advantaged group and the disadvantaged group,
yeah,
and it's very hard, despite everyone's well intentions, it's just very hard to change the inertia of the two groups. So,
exactly, yeah.
yeah,
Well, and a lot of these kids that I've spent time with, I mean, they would say that they never even knew that design was an option. I mean,
yeah,
they never thought that design, whether it's graphic design or fashion design or product design or environmental design or architecture, or, any of the various disciplines, really were within their grasp, that they could make a living at this.
right.
And their parents were the same. And it's really, these are the people that are influencing their sons and daughters, right? So.
Well, I was lucky. My parents supported me. They paid for me to go to Syracuse University. They wanted me to go to a university, but
Yeah.
they had a great art school there, and I
Oh,
was
it's good. It's a really good school. Yeah.
yeah, I was an art major there, and I always say that. I mean, they were hemming and hawing when I said I wanted to be an art major, but they supported me, which was I mean, it was probably the best gift they ever gave me,
Yeah.
honestly, especially because I was probably a little difficult for them to handle in some ways if you were looking from the outside in. But absolutely, and they really knew very little about the opportunities there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I have to say, as I said, I started out in veterinary medicine, and being a kid from Iowa, that was a totally understandable path, right?
yeah,
And my parents were obviously all for that, that they understood. And when I decided I wanted to shift to design, and I didn't really even know what that meant, they thought I was completely nuts.
yeah,
They were, I think, basically horrified. And it wasn't, it took maybe 20, 25 years later.
yeah.
My parents were visiting us here in New York from Iowa, and I was talking with my dad, and he was actually giving me kind of a thumbs up. And I didn't get many. but, and basically, he was validating my decisions, So,
Yeah.
and I mean, it was touching. It was touching. And, I knew as a kid I didn't want to spend my life vaccinating hogs, but,
Right.
I didn't really know where I was going to end up. So.
Wow. Well, Michael, I think we've gone on almost an hour now, but so I think we're going to close this up, and just been a phenomenal discussion with you. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Dan. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you. Good questions.
Oh, thank you. It's been really good. Hope maybe we can do it again sometime.
I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great. All right, Michael, thanks so much.
Check out Outer Places, Dan.
Outer Places.
Outerplaces.com.
Will do.